So I just want to make an announcement at the beginning of the recording. Unfortunately, we forgot to start the recording at the beginning of the program. We've had our bios already, but we will include the slides with the bios that people can see them in the recording as well. And so I apologize for the start, but let me hand it back to our moderator to get back into the program.
Fantastic. And just for those who are wondering, if you don't want to appear on the recording, just keep your video off. You won't appear. If you don't mind, especially when you're asking questions or so forth, you can obviously appear for a second or two. It won't be a problem. So just for those of you, but if you're worried about being recording, stay on this. Just take your video off. You won't appear. That's no problem at all. All right, let's get to it. Rabbi Waskow, I can ask you a question, or would you like to dive in? It seemed like you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, let me start, and then you'll open questions is fine.
Yes, please.
So, my essay in the book actually had two quite distinct parts. One of them calls on us to act in a deep way, and the other one calls on us to act in a big way. The deep way is to rethink what is still mostly a hierarchical view of the world. I don't mean only the biological world, where we've begun to get used to a much more ecological view in which species and ecosystems fit together with each other. But we haven't yet applied that very well to our cultures, our religions, our politics, etc. The real question is whether we can accustom ourselves to not somebody or somebody's ruling over everybody else, whether it's human beings ruling over the rest of the planet or some human beings ruling over others and denigrating and acting with contempt toward others. But how do we fit together, knowing that we have differences? Can the differences fit together the way the pieces in the jigsaw puzzle fit together, making up the great whole, the great one? From that perspective, translating the traditional biblical Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh as Lord and King, Melech, is not really right. It's not accurate, it's not truthful, and it's not good. We should be doing better. In fact, let me a little going back to as if the beginning. Rucha at Yah. Eloheinu Ruach Haolam Asher Kitchanu b'mitzvot v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We honor the breath of life. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, if you try to pronounce it with no vowels, comes out just as a breath. And I think one of the most brilliant acts of ancient biblical Israel was to say, oh, the name of God is just breathing. We all breathe, no matter what other names we may attach to God, but we all breathe. And what turns out, trees breathe, and bushes breathe, burning or otherwise breathe, and animals, not just humans, breathe. So that great breath unites us, and we should be honoring it rather than saying some people or some species are more allowed than others to rule the roost. The second part of my essay is about what we have come since the essay to give a name, the name Activefests, from activist festivals, Activefests. What would it mean if we collectively decided? What would it mean if the Reform movement, among others, decided that every Jewish holy day required and celebrated an action to heal the world, to heal the world of exploitation and subjugation, to heal the world in its relationship between Adam, the human race, and Adamah, the earth from which, according to Torah, we were born. What would it mean to make the festivals themselves bearers of action? Some of us have done that sporadically and occasionally, but what would it mean to do it deliberately and consciously? So that's where I'm at, and I welcome whatever questions you have.
Thank you very much. Well, you covered one of the first parts that I had as a question, which was I was really struck by the way in which you use God's name as a reminder of breath. And I wanted to, I won't ruminate on that because I think you've said it so beautifully. I want to talk about a part that really stuck with me. And that's sort of, for those who will get a chance to read it, you will really get into all the different sort of important touch points for Jews and all the different celebrations that are possible, to your point. And one of them around Shabbat that you talk about and the need for self-restraint. And I thought about this and I thought, is it just that there's a need for self-restraint, or is it sort of a fear of a lack of enough, a lack of abundance? And how can we incorporate sort of the need to reject this sort of scarcity that we have that has so many people end up being wasteful? You talk about how when we have enough, we can eat, but when we leave, it goes to rot and so forth. And that really struck with me about this idea of the need to not to embrace sort of also a spiritual and a faith, an embrace of enough that, that's sort of embedded in your piece, and then also really embedded in this question. Because I think a lot of it comes from the lack of self-restraint that you talk about, comes from a lack of a belief that there will be enough, a belief that you have enough, right? That sort of belief that underpins it. So I'd love for you to ruminate a little about that, because I thought there was really underneath was so beautiful.
The story of manna, for me, is one of the best teachings of all this, because manna said there needs to be self-restraint in the way you eat this amazing food that proves the universe is abundant, even though the mistakes of Gan Eden, of the Garden of Eden, brought about a world in which we were hungry and the earth wasn't feeding us well. But because we violated self-restraint and didn't restrain ourselves, I think we were adolescents who insisted on grabbing whatever was in sight. And if it meant disobeying Papa, Mama, God, okay, that's what adolescents do. But the story of the manna, I think, comes with the first information for human beings of Shabbat. And Shabbat becomes a way of restraining oneself that's not denial, not self-denial, but self-celebration, because it's communal celebration. And I think that a Shabbat that teaches singing and dancing and learning Torah that often is funny and often is serious, learning it together with underlined together, is a way of self-restraint that doesn't make us feel, hey, I want more, because we're getting more at a different level. And I think that that story is a really important corrective of the story of the Garden of Eden.
So you've been at the Shalom Center for 4 years. You've really dived into a lot of important topics there. Why this book now? Why was it so important that you sort of be a part of this conversation and really push this conversation around climate change?
Well, for maybe 25 of the last 30 years at the Shalom Center, I felt that it was very hard to convince serious social justice Jews that Earth was an important issue. And I think the reason for that was that biblically, it was totally clear that everything the biblical tradition teaches is about joy with the earth, praying, not praying with words, but praying with food, which comes from the earth. And you can go through the whole business and see that. But not only were we thrown out of Eretz Israel by the Roman Empire, but every country felt that it was okay to throw the Jews out. And the result was, I think, that in rabbinic Judaism, there was little emotional attachment to the earth, and therefore little policy attachment to the earth. What was the point? You could get thrown out anytime. So, for the reform movement, which was committed to social justice, to say, hey, the earth is sacred. The biblical tradition was right about that, and we need to respond to it. And it's not a contradiction to social justice. It's deeply connected to social justice. The social injustice of corporations that have the biggest profits in the world, insisting they're going to keep on burning the earth in order to make their profits bigger. And the social injustice of the poor who didn't bring about this disaster that we're caught in, suffering the worst of it. That is a social justice question. So I was joyful, excited, celebratory when the reform movement, the CCAR, the reform rabbis, and their press invited us to think seriously in rabbinic Judaism. What would it mean to go beyond, perhaps, most of rabbinic Judaism, to commit ourselves to healing the earth?
Rabbi Waskow, thank you so much for your chapter, and thank you so much for your words here. We're going to move on to the next person, but I want to remind people that if you have questions specifically for Rabbi Waskow, for any of the people, please put them in the chat, and then we will follow back up through. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We're gonna go on. Thank you thank you, and everybody give a virtual round of applause for Rabbi Waskow as we bring on Rabbi DeGroot. Thank you. So just really quickly, again, I know that there was, really quickly, Rabbi DeGroot is the Associate Director for the Shalom Center, and we're very excited to have the Rabbi with us right now to talk about your chapter. Thank you so much, and thank you again, let's go.
Thanks, Jordan.
So I was, Rabbi DeGroot, I thought what's interesting about your chapter was this idea about nature and the fact that we didn't have a word for nature for so many thousands of years in Judaism. I guess I won't spoil it for people. Do you want to just talk a little bit about why that is and what you think that means for us as we think about sort of the climate crisis that we face in front of us?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan, and just congratulations to everyone who was involved with the launch of this book, and this being the official day of the launch. It's exciting to be part of it. Yeah, so I was really kind of surprised and amused when I learned, I don't know, maybe a decade ago at this time, that that Judaism didn't have a word for nature for thousands of years, like Jordan said. I would have thought that it might have been in the story of creation or in Noah's Ark. Certainly by the time that Psalms roll around and you have so many references to the natural world, you would think that Hebrew would contain a word for nature, but based on my research and my understanding, there's not a word specifically talking about nature, like the natural world, the trees and the grasses, until the 12th century of the Common Era. So depending on kind of when you start the stopwatch of Jewish time, which once you get into kind of mythical time, it's kind of anyone's guess, but we're talking at least a few thousand years of Judaism without a specific word for nature. So how could that be? I think the understanding that I come to is really that all of divinity is oneness that nature is contained within divinity, or is a garment or an aspect of the divine. And so for people who understood nature as such an inherently divine aspect, there was no need for a word for nature that is separate from God. And it wouldn't have maybe even occurred to Jews to consider a word for nature, because nature was part of that embodiment of God. And so for us, I think the implications are profound, that as we destroy the natural world or elevate it and honor it, as we waste natural resources, if we're going to kind of anchor into ancient understanding of Jewish divinity, then I think we're left with no choice but to understand the way that we relate to the natural world as a reflection of the way that we relate to the divine.
And one of the things I thought was really beautiful about your chapter was the way in which you sort of reframe our thinking away from the idea of the sort of natural world as punishment, and especially maybe the climate change as punishment, but rather as sort of a warning, but also an opportunity. That since we are in wrestling with, but we are in sort of with the divine, that when we destroy it, we are also sort of, it's like a warning. There's consequences to this, which I really thought was a really smart. I'm not doing justice. You should definitely read the book and read this chapter. It's fantastic, and really reframing thinking around this that I thought was just really beautiful.
Well, yeah, thanks, Jordan. You know, so maybe most Jews are familiar with the Shema, right? This is kind of the credo, the central line that Jews chant. But the paragraph that immediately comes after that is basically a roadmap for the world that we're living in today. Essentially, it says, right, if you live in right relationship with the divine, if you live in a respectful and responsible and honoring relationship with the natural world, that the world will function in a way that yields abundance, kind of going back to what you and Rabbi Waskow were talking about. And if you don't, if you're living outside of right relationship, if you're in an antagonistic or an othering relationship with the natural world, right, the consequence is scarcity. The consequence is iron skies and copper earth. It's the rain not falling in its season, the crops not bringing abundant harvest. Consequence not as an angry, anthropomorphized, like humanistic God who is angry at us and upset at us for not following the rules and is therefore bringing punishment upon us, who is bringing a consequence against us, but it is the consequence of doing this. If we treat the natural world with irreverence, then the natural world will treat us back with irreverence, because that's how this kind of thing works. If we till monocropped crops and dry out our soil, it shouldn't be any surprise when the soil is no longer healthy. Some might see that as a divine punishment. Some might see that as the natural way that the world works.
The other part of the Torah that you pull out, which I thought was really poignant for myself also, as well, is the story of Babel. And you say that valuing bricks more than people. I would love for you to sort of tease that out a little bit more. It's an important part of your chapter as well that I thought was really well done.
Yeah, thanks. So I first heard this piece of Talmud taught by Rabbi Noah Kushner in San Francisco at the Kitchen at a Shavuot program actually a few years ago. And it's really sat with me in a very deep and kind of central way since I learned it with her, from her. So the story of the Tower of Babel, some of us are familiar with. The people tried to build a tower so high into the sky that it would kind of touch the heavens. And the question is asked of how high exactly was this tower. And it says that the tower was so high that it took the people who were building it an entire year to get from the ground all the way to the top of the tower. It took them a year to summit the tower. And so when someone was at the top adding the next layer of bricks, adding to the height, if a brick were to fall, right, think about all the time and energy that went into forming that brick and putting it and baking it in the oven and then climbing up a year-long trek and journey, and the brick would fall. it says that the people would sit in their places. They would cry out, "Oi li," like "Woe is me," "Oi, oi to me," and they would cry, which makes some sense with such an investment of time and energy into the brick. However, immediately following that, it says that if a person were to fall from the tower and die, it says they wouldn't pay any attention at all. They wouldn't even simu lev. Their hearts wouldn't even, it wouldn't even register in their hearts. And this is such a heartbreaking story to me, not just because of the historical nature of it or the mythological nature of it, but because of how true it feels for us today, when profit is valued over people, when the brick is valued more than a human life, when our society is driven by accumulation and wealth and power. I once heard a Muslim professor from Duke say that capitalism is the world's largest religion, right? And I think that's another way of articulating this midrash from the Talmud. And until we as a society and a collective are able to shift the balance of what we pay attention to, of where we direct our heart from the brick to the person, all of these crises that we're facing, including maybe the most existential of the climate crisis, that those will continue until or unless we're directing our hearts towards human souls and spirits, and the more than human world.
Thank you so much. I thought that was beautiful. And again, I want to remind people that this is another fantastic chapter in the book, which you should definitely get. Please give a virtual thank you to Rabbi DeGroot, and thank you so much as we bring on Rabbi Bahar. Thank you again. So I know that some people weren't able to hear, so I am just going to repeat really quickly. Rabbi Bahar is the rabbi at Temple Beth Israel in Macon, Georgia, and the Forward recognized Rabbi Bahar as one of America's 33 most inspirational rabbis. And having read your chapter, I definitely understand why that is. Your chapter was fantastic. I really loved pulling out the book of Jeremiah sort of in its historical context and how that really relates to where we are now. I think, like many activists, I myself have also felt very close to the book of Jeremiah. And so for those people who have yet to have a chance to read this really wonderful chapter, can you please describe for them sort of how you relate the moment of the book of Jeremiah to this moment, and also how the book is put together in a way that's different from how other books are put together, and how that really reflects sort of the disjointed place we're in?
So two things. First of all, the book of Jeremiah, he's known as the weeping prophet. For obvious reasons, he was really truly weeping at the destruction of the first temple. In terms of how the book is constructed, then I'm going to connect it back to why it's relevant. First, the book is totally disjointed. It is not chronological at all. You really have to dig into it to find out why and read through it. But one of the biggest reasons, I think, and Kathleen O'Connor also argues in one of her books, is that it's trauma literature. So just like anybody, whenever we experience trauma, we don't recognize or remember all of the events chronologically, minute by minute by minute. We remember it piecemeal and in flashes. And so the whole book is put together almost as, I think, a physical representation of the fact that the entire Jewish people went through the massive trauma of losing the first temple. And for me, why and how I connected to the period that we're going through today is that we're going through the trauma of losing the earth the way it has been, at least when I grew up, with 4 seasons and not a significant climate change to more extreme weather, things that aren't functioning the way they used to. I mean, I live in the state of Georgia. We don't have peaches. We are the peach state. Because of climate change this year, there aren't peaches right now to harvest. 90% of the crop was wiped out. And so when you sit and realize that we are in a phase of massive transition, I think the book of Jeremiah offers lessons of how do you walk through that phase of transition with faith and the ability to have something powerful, hope, and make meaning of what you're dealing with. Because mostly it's really hard to make meaning as you're going through a challenging event, and we are, to a new phase. where we're going to have to find a new path forward. So one of the, I'm just going to give you one of the things that when I look at Jeremiah especially, is that he uses a lot of language of creation. He uses a lot of language that kind of tells us that the creation is unraveling. So he instead of there being a Garden of Eden where everything is described as bountiful, we really see the unspooling of creation. And he compares that to the Babylonian armies that came through and wiped out the fields, that's what they were dealing with. But I want to emphasize that he wasn't just the bearer of bad news. He wasn't just criticizing the dominant culture, which he absolutely was through sign act, through metaphor. But he was also really trying to say that this was an opening for real and substantial change. That there was a faithful alternative in how to live life. And I think for that alone, that there's a lot of parallels for us today. And that's a lot.
Yes.
I'm a little passionate about Jeremiah. I love him.
I think one of the things, to your point, one of the things that I really liked that your chapter frames for folks is just that I think in a moment of despair, especially when catastrophe is happening to us, we can either sort of settle into our despair as the endpoint or use that as a catalyst for change. And that's certainly the overarching themes of Jeremiah. Certainly both looking backwards sort of to past destruction and also to the very recent but real destruction that people are living in the aftermath. How do you think about that in terms of instructive for climate change and instructive for the moment that we're in?
Well, I think even when we think about like visit that Jeremiah talks about, he repeats the same phrase, like, I don't know, I think I said like 10 times or something crazy. That means a lot, because one phrase.
Yeah.
And the four verbs are uproot, pull down, destroy, and overthrow. And then it ends with to build and to plant. So again, we're focusing on the negative because we are. Like I remember when I was in high school, started a recycling program in high school, and now years later, there's all these NPR reports on, that people, recycle, but there's not really recycling happening. I mean, it's like, oh my God, we haven't progressed. And it's a little disheartening. And yet, what is it that Jeremiah says is that don't lose hope, keep going forward. You're just going to essentially have to go forward differently. He argues, I think, to use liturgical events also, I think, in a new way. So instead of just having prayers, which Jeremiah definitely uses a lot of ritualistic language in the book in general, he emphasized, I think, and I read again, that liturgies are public and that they require us to gather to use gestures and speech to embody and enact a new relationship with God. That it's required upon us to really push ourselves forward to change once again, and kind of use the words of some of the other authors in the book, but use what we have, but reframe it and restructure it while we're going forward.
And so I think the last piece that I really want to dive into, because I think also is just the idea of the sort of, Jeremiah could have focused on sort of the human death or some other parts, but really does sort of tease out the pieces to the earth, right? The connection to the earth and sort of how that very much represents both our loss and what we were losing, and also uses that as part of the metaphor, the literary that he was trying to invoke emotion, to cause change. So I would love for you to talk more about why you think that was important, why the authors, why you think Jeremiah was sort of what that says about us as Jews in this moment, that was where he took and came from.
I think for me, when I think about him in the use of the languages and the metaphors that he used, they were both immediate and intimate. These were metaphors and images that people knew. When he talks about the scorned wife being a metaphor for the loss of the northern kingdom, it was because it was something that people knew. When he used creation and reframed it in a way, he was playing with the language and the ritual that people knew, because he wanted them to get into their kishkis to really issue the change that they were going to be needing to go forward and make. They couldn't just sit on their tuchas anymore. They were going to be either marching to Babylon, marching to Egypt, and if they were unfortunate, they were going to be staying in the land, and they were going to have to make a new a new way of going forward. And so the only way he could get to do that, again, was the intimacy and immediacy.
Get off your tuchus is a perfect way to end, I think, this piece, and a nice transition. Thank you so much. Please give a virtual thank you to Rabbi Bahar as we transition. Thank you so much. And again, I want to encourage people. This is a fantastic chapter. I learned so much. It really is a great sort of reframing of some work that we have had. I think all of us have connection to, and just to apply it. So thank you again. And with that, I'm going to go to Dr. Goldsmith to round us out. So Dr. Goldsmith, again, for folks who weren't able to hear the first time, is an environmental psychologist and activist who is the co-founder of Jewish Earth Alliance. And I want to thank Dr. Goldsmith for joining us as we talk on this side. So Dr. Goldsmith, your section really focuses on the ideas of political will and how we get there. And I was struck again by something I had never thought about. So you tackle the story of Jonah and the people of Nineveh, and the idea that, like, we sort of think like, oh, isn't it weird that he showed up and people changed? And you point out that of course there were people in Nineveh at the time who were organizing, who were agitating for change, waiting for sort of that moment for people to finally get it. And it arrives with Jonah, with the word of God saying we need to change, but without that tilling beforehand, right? Like, is that right? This is gonna be some guys. So I would love for you to talk more about that and how that really does, this story really does sort of translate to the ideas that we need to create political will now.
Thank you for the question. Before we go into it, I just want to say thank you for having me on this panel. It's an honor to be with so many rabbis, and especially with my teacher, Rabbi Waskow, who has really, I think, given us a window into the ecological messages of Judaism throughout the ages. And I know my own personal activism has been completely and utterly transformed and enriched by that teaching. When I say that I'm honored, I want to point out that the reason that I wrote this chapter, it actually started with a request from my rabbi. So for all you rabbis out there, listen up. My rabbis, Rabbi Rachel Hirsch and Fred Sherlinder Dobb, came to me and said, will you speak on Yom Kippur when we read the book of Jonah? Believe me, I had never read that book very closely before. But when I read it, I was so struck by the fact that, as you pointed out, Jonah comes to Nineveh. He gives a 5-word message. Od arba'im yom v'Nineveh nehapachet. In 40 days, Nineveh will be overturned. And somehow everything changes. And the king actually gets off of his throne and takes off his beautiful robes and puts on sackcloth and sits in ashes. And isn't that what we want? We want repentance from our political leaders, right? We want them to do teshuvah and to change their way of acting. That's exactly what we want. So how do we get there? And I'm an environmental psychologist, so I was interested in this chapter in sharing what we know about the social science of behavior change and how people change and how that can help us as activists. And the story of Jonah really encapsulates it. I said that the king changes, but what happens before that? What we see is that small steps are the building blocks of systemic change. We know that, who mentioned, Rabbi Bahar mentioned the recycling, right? We know that recycling is not going to save the world, right? There's a lot more important things that we could be doing with our time. But it's really important that people take small steps, because when they take those small steps, it changes them, or I should say it changes us. We become committed to a different path. We know that we need to change hearts to inspire individuals. And once the individuals change, that activates communities. People get together, they find their power. They start to build the broad social movement that we need to produce unstoppable change. And that's what we see. I think that's what's going on in Nineveh, right? The individual people repent, they get together, and eventually they influence the political sphere. They influence the powers that be. And one of the things I talk about in the chapter, and I think this is what you're getting at really, is that we as individuals often don't know how much change is happening. We know from, there's some social science out there that says that Americans The average American has a network of 600 people. As an activist, I can say my network is way bigger than 600. But anyway, the average American has 600 people in their network. And we influence not only the people directly in our network, but people at 2 or 3 removes from us. And that's why when we hit that tipping point, it's so surprising, because we don't know that we've been influencing those people, you know, in those concentric circles around us. And I think that's what's happening today. And I think we can take a lot of encouragement and hope from the fact that the climate movement, you know, with us Jews in our small corner of it, is growing and growing under the surface. And very soon we're going to be hitting a tipping point.
So one of the other things that your chapter talks about is the importance of sort of hope underpinning the work that we're doing and the messages that we're talking about, as well for Jews as a moral obligation. I would love for you to talk about that. And I think you do a great job just sort of interspersing that with the story of Jonah, which I just absolutely love.
Yeah, I think many of the rabbis here can say more about the message of hope in Judaism, but I just take it really to the basics. I mean, what is our foundational story? It's the story of a tiny people that overcomes the enslaved, powerless, that overcomes the mightiest empire in the world. That's our foundational story, and it's repeated over and over and over again, and we go back to it, you know, constantly. And that's in our DNA. We know we can do that. What was the second part? I already forgot.
Moral obligation.
Moral. That's the part the rabbi should really talk about. But you know, that's what I learned from Rabbi Waskow and so many of my other teachers. It's throughout Judaism, right? And what is, you know, this is our time. This is our challenge. But all those teachings about moral, you know, our moral obligation to each other, to the earth, to God, they all are playing out today in the climate crisis. I just want to say one other thing that I learned. This book is fantastic. I want to say to all of you, don't stop with this program because there's only 4 of us here. There's over 40 chapters in this book. And I've read all the books on Judaism and the environment. And I can tell you that this book, the essays in this book, the authors have taken things to a completely different level. The depth of scholarship and the depth of inspiration that's in this book is really something that we haven't had before. You should really read the book. And I want to mention something that I learned from Rabbi Waskow here. I'm with Jewish Earth Alliance. We're a grassroots activist network in the Jewish community, making it easy for you to be advocates. And we have a Tisha B'Av lobby day, virtual lobby day coming up in July, right before Tisha B'Av. And, you know, I was thinking Tisha B'Av, you know, from tragedy to transformation. But when I read Rabbi Waskow's chapter, I realized there's so much more to it. In that chapter, he talks about all the different, not all, but most of the Jewish holidays. And he talks about how the temple is a microcosm of the earth. And the earth is our temple that is endangered today. And Tisha B'Av is exactly the time when we should be raising our voices, getting off our tuchuses, as Rabbi Bahar said, and bringing our message to our political leaders. So I know someone has that link, and you can put it in the chat now. And I would like to see all 73 of you sign up to participate in our Tisha B'Av virtual lobby day. It's so easy, but you will be powerful. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that's a great place to end. Thank you so much, Dr. Goldsmith. I really appreciate it. A big round of applause virtually to all of the people who are here today speaking on it. But as Dr. Goldsmith pointed out, there are 40 great, there's so much great stuff. I think there's, because some chapters have 2 people. So there's, I don't remember how many authors, but there's a lot of really great content in there. I couldn't suggest it enough. And I'm going to kick it to Rabbi Olshein to talk a little bit about where we go from here.
Hi, everyone. It is so nice to see you all here. And I'm going to say that you don't actually have to get off your tuchus to do something. You can sit on your tuchus and do something. So we are going to walk through one of the easiest ways for us to make a difference. Now, you might not think that filling out a form on a governmental website might do anything. So I'm going to start my part of the presentation by sharing a document that's actually I think really important for us, because I don't think everybody understands how important commenting is. So on regulations.gov, our government tells us what the rulemaking procedure is. And, we've already gone through the pre-rule stage and the rule that we're going to be commenting on tonight, and we're in the proposed rule stage. So right here, what you see is they have to give us notice. We get 60 days to comment, and we're going to comment on one rule tonight. And you can actually comment on two if you'd like. And what happens is that sometimes there are actually no comments made on a proposed rule, but sometimes there are thousands. We never know. That means that if there's a rule, like sometimes there's only a couple thousand comments made. So if there are very few comments made on a rule, that means our comment has more power. All comments to governmental agencies have to actually be read. It is required that they be read and analyzed before the final rule stage comes into play, before the rule will either be accepted, adapted, or thrown out. And that is super important for us to think about, how much power we have, how much power each of us has with just getting on the internet, right? And filling out a form. So we are in the Power for Purpose campaign. We're in an on-election cycle year, and the national campaign team at the URJ's Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism evaluated different ways that we could raise our voices collectively. We looked at different issues we could speak about, and what we discovered was that climate was one of the most important issues, and we have a wonderful base of individuals that are just ready to take action. How are we going to do that? We're going to find partners to do it. So I want to show you this particular page right on the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism website. And you're going to see in just a couple minutes, we're going to put up a QR code. You'll take your phone, you take a picture of it, it'll take you right to the page you want to be on. So just give us a second and we'll take you right there. So this is the opening page, and it says, you can be part of a powerful movement for change to prevent the devastation of climate change that disproportionately impacts communities of color. So it's not just climate action, climate change. We're actually doing an action for climate justice when we speak up with respect to how climate change impacts not just us, but all different peoples on this planet. So the issue that we're going to talk about is about reducing harmful chemicals, soot, smog, carbon, and mercury. Look, that's not sexy at all, but what it is it impacts literally every human being on the planet. You're going to go and you're going to click individuals, submit comments here. It's going to take you to our action center. You'll notice that we have partnered with votervoice.net, and it allows us to collect our comments as they're going through, as they're being processed. So we can tell how many comments that we as Reform, liberal, progressive Jews are making. When we enter our information in, we've set a goal of 3,600 comments this summer. We're over 600 already, and we'll have plenty of opportunity if each one of us tonight fills out our comments. And then maybe if you have a Facebook profile, maybe you go and you post it and you put the link and it says, I just made a difference. I let my voice be heard. You can too. Go to this particular page. We hope that you'll consider doing that. So why do we care? When we go to this page, it tells us what the plan is that has been proposed. And I'm going to click over to it so you can see why it matters. And also, when we're making our individual comments, each and every one of us here online has some sort of personal story. We either are impacted individually or we know someone who is impacted individually. So let me just show you in this release where it talks about the why behind why this rule is necessary. So if this rule is passed in 2030 alone, it would prevent 1,300 premature deaths, 800 hospital and emergency room visits, 300,000 cases of asthma. How many people do each and every one of us know that has asthma? School absences, 38,000 they're estimating, and 66,000 lost work days if this rule is put into effect. So what is it all about? This rule is going to change the way new gas-powered plants are regulated and existing coal-fired plants are regulated. That's something that should matter to every one of us. I'm the senior rabbi of Temple Emmanuel of Tempe, Arizona. In the Phoenix Valley, air quality, it's just better to stay inside many days, especially during the summer. So this matters to me, just like I know that happens all over our country nowadays, and so it should matter to you. So let's go back to this page. So if you're interested in reading all the details, you go to proposed plan. But really what we want you to do is we want you to fill the form out. And I'm going to show you how easy it is. I am filling it out right here. Now, one of the things that you should remember is that telling a story changes the impact. And there's an actual human being. Don't watch my, I'm putting my synagogue address in here. Here we go. Temple Emmanuel of Tempe. There we go. Every one of us has a personal story. Let's see why I'm having trouble going down here. Excuse me while you're watching. All right. So you have here a proposed message once you fill everything out. Subject line, please adopt a strong carbon rule to cut air pollution. Okay. You can change your subject to be anything that you want it to be. You can also leave it because volume matters. So I am going to, unfortunately, I have to make it smaller in order to write here. As a Reform rabbi, that's how I'm going to make mine. I write in response to the EPA's proposed rule to cut carbon pollution from coal and national gas-fired power plants. I'm going to encourage you to add in your own personal reason. I'm going to go down to the bottom here and send my message. And we're going to put you can see we got a confirmation right here. We're going to go ahead, I'm going to stop my share, and we're going to go ahead and put up the link that will allow you to use your phone if you want to use your phone, or you can just go to www.rac.org P4P action, power for purpose action, and that will allow you to make your comment right now. We have two asks. One, that you make your comment now, if at all possible. If you want to do more research, that's fine. But if you can make your comment now, and then just put done right in the chat so that we know that you've had the opportunity and you have followed through and completed the opportunity to make your comment. Please know on that first page, the P4P action page, there are two opportunities. The one we're going to do tonight is the top one, but please feel free, especially to go back to the bottom one, which focuses on mercury and mercury levels. Please do go back and you have the opportunity to make a second comment. We're going to play some music now, I believe. Look, we've got some people in the comments. Can individuals submit more than one comment? It should be one comment per regulation per person. So I would say go back to the P4P action line page and go to the bottom one if you want to make the comment on the mercury rule as well. Dr. Goldsmith, thank you. Jacob Kraus Preminger, can you address that in the chat? Because it is all reform. Can we add an other category? We will be addressing.
Great question, Dr. Goldsmith. I can add one now, but it is something we can look at for the future. But it's a really good question.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. And Raphael Chaikin from CCAR Press, thank you. It is super easy to do. One of my favorite teachings, as I hope you're all filling out your forms, one of my favorite teachings comes from the late Representative Mo Udall of Arizona, and he used to say that a thoughtfully written letter could, he assumed as a representative, represented the viewpoint of 10,000 individuals. So, when we think maybe filling out a form doesn't do anything, adding that little personal touch of why it's important to me, why it's important to you, really can change. Really can change the world. All right, comments and questions in the chat are welcome. Please, one last thing. If you are part of a congregation, one of the easiest things you can do is you can invite people to join you online to do exactly what I just did. And you saw how few minutes it took. It didn't take very long at all. So you can invite people, jump online, 8 o'clock, wherever you are. We're going to pull it up together. We're going to fill it all out together. You can be done in 15 minutes and you can create an action for your sacred community just as easy as what we just did tonight. Yes, Dr. Goldsmith is absolutely right. Change the subject line to make it more personal. Absolutely. I was just trying to make sure you could see that confirmation come through. Absolutely. All right. Message sent. Should feel good. You're making change in the world. By getting off your tush while sitting on your tush, to quote Rabbi Bahar. All right, keep those coming in the chat. I know that we're going to continue on with our program with some Q&A now. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please drop those into the chat as well. Cantor Rosenblum, don't use your phone much for actions. If it's more comfortable, just go to rack.org/P4P action, and then you can do it right on your computer. Okay. Jordan, I think you're going to be facilitating now.
Yes. Yep. I am up. And we're definitely gonna talk about some questions. So great. Sorry, I'm also trying to read the comments. Thank you. Thank you. So this week's this week's Parsha is Shlach. The 10 Meraglim, fellow foot travelers, were fearful that they couldn't triumph over the bigwigs in the promised land. So they argue that the public shouldn't even try to enter. So that's a great question about sort of like climate change can feel overwhelming. And sort of like there's like, what can I do really about this? And so I would love for, I think that's a really good question to sort of tackle for all 4 of our folks. So please do come back on to the stage and we'll ask this question of you. How does Judaism inspire you to get over this thing that can feel overwhelming? For sure. I know for myself, right? It feels like, how are we going to tackle this thing of climate, right? Like, how are we going to tackle this big thing, such a big problem? How does Judaism inspire sort of an answer to that? And what did you pull from your chapter or other chapters in the book that you read that really inspired you to think like, no, we have to, there's a lot of wisdom here to remind us to dive in. I don't want to call on you individually, but I can. If anybody wants to come off mute, one of the 4 of you to answer this question.
Well, I'll just talk about Jeremiah, obviously, just because he's my man right now. But he really, at the end of all of the change, he leads the people forward with his image of hope, that even those who were scattered, he's going to gather them up. And that those who are on the bottom economically now, who may have been in other positions economically, are once again going to find themselves in better, more comfortable positions. Once again, songs will be heard from the heights in Zion. The grain harvest and wine produce will occur, and that we will change as a society because climate changes. But Jeremiah goes on to really assure us that by doing so, we will find an era of new growth and new possibility. So that's what pushes me forward. The idea that we can do 2 things. One, excavate our past, our sacred texts, for that inspiration, and B, know that because we have overcome such deep and profound challenges, we can go forward with I think renewed hope.
Yeah.
So I'd like
Rabbi Waskow.
I'd like to pick up on what Mirele said about Tisha B'Av. I'm delighted that she's organizing a lobby effort. You said sort of a couple of days before Tisha B'Av. I think that's wonderful. In addition, the Shalom Center, a long time ago now, when BP killed 11 of its own employees and a sizable chunk of the life of the Gulf of Mexico, we commissioned now Rabbi Tamara Cohen to write an Eicha for Earth, to write a lament for Earth, which ends with a commitment to act. And in terms of what action, one of the things we've realized is that the classic collision between greed and love, which Judaism and all the great traditions address, is what's at stake in this. One of the worst aspects of facing the climate crisis is that there are certain banks and other pools of money that make enormous profits by investing in burning the earth. That's crazy. And we need to focus on the, I call them modern corporate carbon pharaohs, bringing plagues upon the earth, plagues of fire, of smoke we just saw, smoke that's dangerous and poisonous, floods, disease, asthma, hospitalizing people with asthma, dangerous and lethal cancers. And we can focus on that, saving life from the plagues by convincing people who have lots of money to refuse to invest in burning the planet. So that's a Tisha B'Av act. I mean, there were imperial armies that burned our temples, and there are imperial corporations that are burning our temple earth. So we can address that on Tisha B'Av.
Yep, Dr. Goldsmith, please.
Well, what gives me hope is seeing people taking action. I know that eventually we're going to win. And what keeps me going, I mean, I happen to love protests because, you know, you go to a protest and you're surrounded by people who cared enough to come out. But, you know, it's not only protests. In my synagogue, we did a campaign. We got about 75 households to sign up for community solar. That's for people who cannot put solar panels on their houses. And all those people who, you know, they didn't know about it. When we told them about it, they were happy to do it. We also did a campaign to get people to switch their credit card to a socially responsible bank that does not invest in fossil fuels. We had about 36 people who did that, and we called them up for an aliyah in the shul, and we demonstrated it for the rest of the congregation, that there is really something that you can do. There's a young man who went to day school with my nephew, and he has managed to now get me involved in a direct action group. And the other day we went and we, you don't all have to do this, but I thought it was really hopeful. We went to this speech and we disrupted a speech by Senator Manchin. And that alone was very empowering because, you know, he had to stop talking about what he's doing to destroy the planet. But also there were young people in the audience there who are working in environmental jobs. They've taken these jobs because they want to make a difference for the earth. And they were so excited. They came to us and they said, how can we get involved in this, you know, activism along with our green jobs that we're already doing? A couple of years ago, just one last story. A couple of years ago, I went on an interfaith mission to visit the first offshore wind farm in the United States. It's off the coast of Rhode Island, and it's just 5 wind turbines. We went on a group with Green Faith on a boat out to see these wind turbines. And we learned about the collaborative effort made between the National Wildlife Federation and the local unions to protect the ocean life while they were building the turbines, and then provide green jobs, you know, and provide green energy. And we stood on this deck of this boat, and each community, you know, gave something, a prayer or a reading or a song. And Rabbi Joel Abraham from New Jersey said, in Hebrew, the word ruach means both breath and wind. And here we see that the air, the wind that gives us life, can also give us clean and life-giving energy. And that was just so inspiring to be part of that group and see the future right in front of our eyes. And it really sent me on a journey to become more involved in this movement.
Great. Wonderful.
Rabbi DeGroot.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's a perfect setup, Mirele. I feel like you knew what was coming next. For me, I love this story of, well, the folks who are often called the spies, or as Shalom said in the chat, the fellow foot travelers. And it's right that many of them were scared, but there were some who weren't, and there were some who were willing to go in and to confront this. And one of those people was Kalev, or Caleb. Kalev means like the head heart. Lev and the Torah have this kind of fusion of the head and the heart. And why was Kalev different? Why was this person able to kind of gather the strength and fortitude, maybe prophecy, to be willing to go in? The text says because he had a ruach acheret, a different spirit, a different wind about him, maybe carried by a different wind, a wind of the divine, of the interbreathing of life, as Rabbi Waskow teaches, that same wind in the offshore wind farms that Dr. Goldsmith was teaching about, that ruach acheret, right? We are descendants of those with a ruach acheret, with a different spirit, and harnessing that and allowing that to move us is one of the places where I find hope and fortitude and strength.
And with that, I just want to thank again our panelists. I noticed that some other folks who had contributed to this incredible book were also in the chat. So thank you for being here and for your contributions to the book. And so just as a quick reminder, you will get a follow-up email after today with a link to this recording. You will also get an opportunity to purchase the book. You will also get follow-up with actions that you can take. I want to encourage you to take this recording, to take these actions, to take this book into your communities. Again, as Rabbi Goldsmith, as Dr. Goldsmith said, I keep elevating you. As Dr. Goldsmith said, you are connected to other people, and just those actions of asking and connecting are all the ways in which we'll reach this tipping point towards change. I want to encourage you really to spread the word about taking action on these rules making. It is really important, in light of the way the Supreme Court rules, that there is a robust response in support of these are really good regulations, all things being considered. So please do. This is an important piece. It is an important part of the process, so please do fill it out and encourage your friends, your neighbors, people in your community. Maybe we can have upcoming that we give aliyahs for people who fill it out. I love this idea. There's lots of creative ways that we can make sure that we encourage people to take action from this important work. So please do find in the chat an opportunity to buy the book, an opportunity to donate to the Shalom Center and to all of our participating organizations, the RAC as well. Please do support this important work if you haven't had a chance to do so. I know that there will also be an opportunity to do so in following up. And the last thing I want to leave you with is a beautiful, beautiful poem prayer from the book. Again, this is a fantastic book, from a chapter by Rabbi Sandy Eisenberg Sasso. And so she says, or she quotes this beautiful poem and prayer. God calls each of us by name, and we listen. Rocks tell stories, weather beaten, metamorphosized, hills into mountains, mountains into plains, sacrificial altars, places of dreams, and gushing water. Remember, we stand between the rock, pulsing with life, and the hard place, our warming planet. Stop. Turn aside to see, remove your shoes, pay attention. The ground on which we stand is holy.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. And thank all of us.
Can you please put the words for that poem inside the chat?
It's in the book.
Got it. I bought it.
To say I'm not sure I can, but it's definitely in the book.
Thank you all for coming and participating. See you on the barricade.
Thank you.
I want to thank especially Rabbi Nate, who took the opportunity to pull this together, and wonderful to have done it. And for Linda Carranza, who did all the what we call the Levite work. If the Levites hadn't kept the temple going, it all would have collapsed, right? So
Thank you all.
I will use this heart I've been given and take a stand. I have a voice, my voice is powerful. My voice can change the world. I have a voice, my voice is powerful. My voice can change the world. Change the world. I will fight for the truth. I will fight for the truth. I'll stand up for what's right. I'll stand up for what's right. I will use this strength I've been given and be alive. I have a voice. My voice is powerful. My voice can change the world. I have a voice. My voice is powerful. My voice can change the world. Change the world. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech haolam she'asanu B'Tselem